The time stream has fractured. Memory is no longer a record. It is a battlefield. From the future, waves of temporal distortion sweep backward, overwriting identities, erasing lifetimes, dissolving entire bloodlines into quantum haze. Citizens stand on the edge of unmaking, forced into the Chrono-Mind Reconstruction Directive, the only process capable of anchoring a human consciousness against the collapsing timeline. Those who submit to reconstruction retain themselves. Those who hesitate are erased. This audiobook is the blueprint for survival, because in a broken time stream, the only future that exists is the one a reconstructed mind can hold.
Chapter 1. Chapter 1. Execute the Mind Anchor Sequence. The time stream had begun to fray long before anyone noticed. At first, the shifts were small, an unremembered conversation, a street rerouting itself overnight, a childhood memory dissolving into static as if it had never existed. But by the time the Chronometric Council issued its first official alert, temporal drift waves were already sweeping across the lower sectors. Entire districts flickered in and out of sequence. Families awoke beside strangers who claimed to know them deeply. And through it all, one warning echoed across the collapsing world. Anchor the self. Stabilize the self. Hold the self. Across the fractured city, Arion stood inside the directive intake chamber, its walls softly pulsing with chronolight. The chamber hummed like a massive throat swallowing time, and every vibration resonated through his bones. He had heard stories, terrifying stories, of citizens who failed the anchor sequence, their identities unraveling into translucent silhouettes known as future echo shadows. Shadows that repeated fragments of broken memories. Shadows that wept for lives they no longer owned. Arion steadied his breathing. Anchor the self, he thought. The phrase had become a mantra across the surviving sectors, painted on collapsed transit walls and whispered through cracked loudspeakers. No one could survive the drift without cognitive weight. No one could resist the pull of the unspooling future unless they learned how to anchor who they were. A voice, calm, synthetic, older than the city, filled the chamber. Subject, Arion. Chronodensity, unstable. Identity continuity, compromised. Directive Step 1. Execute the Mind Anchor Sequence. The lights shifted, forming a swirling vortex above him. Within the vortex flickered thousands of moments pulled from fractured timelines. A child's laugh he half recognized. A future version of himself he had never lived. A pair of hands reaching from a timeline not his own. They rotated around him like shattered constellations, each fragment tugging at the edges of his consciousness. Arion felt the pull immediately, a sensation like being stretched into multiple directions across invisible threads of reality. If he let his focus slip for even a breath, he knew he would be torn into the drift. Many had been. Their forms still roamed the outer districts, repeating their last coherent thought. I don't remember. I don't remember. He shut his eyes. Anchor the self, he whispered. The chamber responded, lowering the vortex until it hovered a breath above his skin, warm and electric. The mind anchor sequence was not a machine. It was a confrontation, a battle between identity and entropy. To anchor the mind, he had to choose which memories belonged, which emotions defined him, which versions of himself he refused to surrender. A memory surfaced, his sister, Lysa, tugging at his sleeve on the night the first fissures appeared in the sky. She had asked a simple question: what if tomorrow forgets us? Arion had laughed then. Now the question haunted him like an echo from a dying star. "Stabilize the self," he said, louder this time. The chamber deepened its hum, synchronizing with his pulse. The fractured memories slowed, each fragment aligning into a spiraling pattern. He reached toward one, his mother's voice telling him to stay brave, and felt it lock into place like a celestial gear clicking home. Another memory followed, then another. Each one added weight. Identity density increased. Temporal grip strengthened. But one fragment resisted. An impossible moment of Arion standing on a desolate ridge under a sky of 3 suns. A version of him older, battle-worn, whispering urgently, "Remember who you are. Timeline 7 collapses next." He had no memory of living this, yet it pulsed with a truth that set his skin alight. Arion hesitated. The chamber dimmed, sensing the destabilization. Warning, identity anchor at risk. Hold the self. He exhaled. Hold the self. He accepted the paradox. He anchored both the known and the unknown, the lived and the yet to be lived. The vortex contracted sharply, then fused into a single beam that pierced his chest, filling his mind with blinding clarity. Silence. A stabilized silence. Mind anchor established. Arion had survived the first step. But as the chamber door slid open, a low tremor rippled through the facility. The time stream had shifted again. Reality itself was recalibrating, and whatever awaited in the next phase would demand more than anchoring. It would demand truth. And truth in a collapsing timeline was the most unstable element of all.
Chapter 2. Chapter 2. Stabilize your identity against temporal drift. Temporal drift always began quietly, not with explosions or collapsing buildings, but with a whisper. A soft distortion in the air, like a memory trying to rewrite itself. As Arion stepped out of the anchor chamber, the metallic hallway pulsed with an unnatural rhythm. Lights flickered in patterns he did not recognize. The symbols etched on the emergency doors, symbols that should have been universal, shifted subtly each time he blinked, as if the timeline itself was forgetting the language it once created. He had survived the anchor sequence, but anchoring was only the first battle. The directive reminded every citizen that anchoring alone could not save them. Temporal drift was relentless, slow, patient. It unthreaded identity not in a single violent moment, but in thousands of quiet rewrites. And somewhere within the trembling city, the drift was accelerating. Arion pressed his palm against a scanning panel. It delayed, far too long, before agreeing he was himself. The machine stuttered, flickered, then projected 2 overlapping identity logs, one belonging to him, the second belonging to an Arion who wore a military insignia he had never earned. The logs collided, pixels dissolving into digital snow. A warning flashed. Identity corruption probable. Stabilization required. Arion swallowed hard. Identity must be stabilized, he reminded himself, echoing the directive's mantra. Then again firmer, identity must be reinforced. Identity must be chosen. A distant siren trembled through the facility. Not an alarm of danger. This one was far worse. This was the chrono-siren, a signal broadcast when drift reached a critical threshold in a nearby district. Its sound vibrated with something ancient, something hungry, something that pulled at the brainstem. People who heard it often forgot who they were for minutes, or hours, or permanently. Arion steadied himself and stepped into the observation atrium. Through its transparent ceiling, the sky twisted like a whirlpool of fractured glass. Above the city towers, streaks of blue and gold spiraled together, bending gravity in slow, beautiful arcs. Temporal distortion waves, he realized. The drift was rising faster than predicted. The atrium was nearly empty, only 2 technicians remained. One stared at a datapad, repeating her name over and over, as though afraid it would slip away. The other was hunched beside the wall, sketching a symbol Arion had seen before, the spiraling glyph that appeared in drift-affected zones. It echoed a question that had been forming in Arion's mind since the anchor sequence. What is real? The directive's second lesson charged through his thoughts. Lock your mind to the gravitic center of your true self. But where was the center? In memory? In emotion? In choice? His anchor had stabilized his core identity, but drift rewrote the edges, the details, the connections, the context that made a life coherent. To resist drift, he needed more than anchoring. He needed alignment. He closed his eyes. And the world responded. Fragments surfaced again, not from malfunctioning machines, but from within him. He saw Lisa laughing on the bridge before the first time fracture appeared. He saw his father teaching him how to repair the old solar arrays. He even saw the impossible older version of himself from the anchor sequence vortex, warning him, Timeline 7 collapses next. The images collided, blurred, then snapped back into clarity. Arion felt a pull, a gravitational pull of identity. Identity must be chosen. When he opened his eyes, his reflection rippled across the atrium glass. For a split second, the reflection wasn't him. It was the alternate Arion from the identity corruption log, wearing that military insignia. Arion stepped backward sharply. The reflection followed a half-beat too late. Temporal drift had reached him. A tremor ran through the floor. Distant screams echoed from lower sectors. The technicians grabbed each other as the atrium's walls pulsed with shifting symbols. Arion inhaled as deeply as a drowning man dragging in one last breath. Then he whispered the directive's second mantra. Identity must be stabilized. Identity must be reinforced. Identity must be chosen. He felt it, a tightening, a locking, a settling of his consciousness into its true orbit. His reflection corrected itself. The atrium steadied. The world, for a moment, remembered him. But only for a moment. A crack split the sky, clean, jagged, expanding. Another timeline was about to rupture through, and Arion suddenly understood. Stabilization was not a destination. It was a battle fought in every breath, every thought, every second of drift. What came next would demand more than choosing identity. It would demand defending it.
Chapter 3 Chapter 3 Rebuild the Neural Timeline Matrix. Arion descended into the lower facility, Sector Theta, the place where the directive housed its most delicate work. The air grew colder as he walked, thick with the metallic scent of machinery and the faint, broken hum of timelines folding in on themselves. The walls were lined with flickering holoscreens that displayed shifting diagrams of the human mind, each one bending, warping, glitching with every passing second. This was where reality was redrawn. This was where the neural timeline matrix was rebuilt or lost forever.
A disembodied voice filled the corridor, its tone both clinical and compassionate. Warning, memory architecture unstable, neural matrix reconstruction recommended, rebuild, realign, reconstruct. The mantra wrapped around him like a pulse, a reminder, a command, a necessity. He knew what the matrix was. Every citizen did. It was the invisible internal lattice that gave order to their lives. The chronological arrangement of memories, choices, associations, everything that made one reality feel coherent when another tried to overwrite it. But drift didn't just steal memories, it scrambled the matrix, turning yesterday into tomorrow and replacing truth with the ghost of a future that never existed. Arion reached the core chamber. It opened like a blooming metal flower, petals unfurling to reveal a seat suspended by gravity fields. It shimmered with translucent wires that pulsed like veins. He hesitated. Rumors claimed the matrix chamber showed you not only the memories you had lived, but the ones you should have lived, the ones you lost, the ones taken by drift. He stepped into the seat. Instantly, the chamber awakened, sending tendrils of soft light up his arms, across his ribcage, around his skull. A whisper echoed in his mind. Rebuild. Then reality tore open. He was standing in an old marketplace, one that had been erased years ago during the first collapse event. Vendors shouted, children ran beneath glowing banners. His mother's voice called to him from the fruit stall. But Arion knew this wasn't a memory. Not exactly. It was a fragment, a piece of the matrix trying to realign itself to his consciousness. Yet something was wrong. The colors vibrated too sharply. The shadows leaned in unnatural angles. And across the plaza, a symbol pulsed on the wall. The spiraling drift glyph he had seen etched by the technician. It glowed like a warning from the timeline itself. Arion reached for the memory. It shuddered, flickered, nearly dissolved. Realign. The words surged through him, not spoken out loud, but embedded into his neural fibers. He steadied the scene, held it firm with the force of recognition. The marketplace stabilized. His mother's face came into focus, real, warm, human. But then, as quickly as it formed, the scene fractured like shattered glass. He hurtled into another timeline. A training field, rows of cadets, a version of himself standing taller, sharper, wearing the same military insignia from the corrupted identity log. This Arion barked orders with a command he never possessed. His eyes bore the weight of wars Arion had never fought. This wasn't his life, but the directive had warned him, the Matrix holds every path your timeline could have taken. The alternate Arion turned toward him, and for a breath, one terrifying heartbeat, Arion thought the other version recognized him. "You cannot escape the signal," the alternate whispered. The phrase chilled him. He had heard it before, but where? When? The scene quaked, collapsing. Reconstruct. The chamber pulsed. Arion gasped as he was thrust back into his own body, heart racing, memories swirling like a storm. But the matrix wasn't complete. He could feel gaps, holes, inconsistencies pulling at the edges of his mind. A hologram flickered on before him, showing a citizen standing calmly against a distortion wave, unaffected, unmoving. A temporal fixed point. These were the ones who rebuilt their matrix so completely, so meticulously, that no future could overwrite them. Arion stared as the hologram demonstrated the process, aligning emotional anchors with logical sequences, stitching identity threads into a resilient framework, reinforcing memories with conscious choice. This is what survival looks like, he realized. He inhaled, slow and steady. Rebuild, realign, reconstruct. He repeated the words as he pieced together his timeline. He pulled the true memories forward, let the false ones fade, and welded his identity into a coherent whole, one that drift could not easily fracture again. Sparks of clarity ignited in his mind. Moments synchronized, chaos aligned. The neural timeline matrix locked into place with the sound like distant thunder finally resolving into harmony. But just as the final thread snapped into completion, the chamber lights dimmed. A mechanical voice whispered through static. Warning, unauthorized timeline breach detected in Sector 9. Arion froze. Sector 9 was Lisa's last known location, and the reconstruction was over. Now the real fight began.
Chapter 4. Chapter 4. Eliminate future echo contamination. The warning tone still vibrated in Arion's bones as he stepped out of the reconstruction chamber. Sector 9. Lysis Sector. The words echoed through him like a hollow strike against metal. But before he could move toward the lifts, a low, wavering hum rippled through the corridor. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't environmental. It was something far more insidious, something alive within the time stream. A future echo. The hum distorted the air, bending light around itself in soft waves. Arion froze as a faint silhouette stepped into view, a blurred figure shaped like him, yet slightly wrong. Its outline flickered, its limbs lagging behind its movements, as though trapped between frames of time. Where its face should have been, a shifting mask of possibilities pulsed. Dozens of Arions, all seconds apart, all undone futures trying to align. He inhaled sharply. Future echoes were previews of discarded timelines, fragments of futures that once existed but had been overwritten by drift. They had no consciousness, no intent, but they carried a danger far more profound. If one touched him, its memories could overwrite his own. If one fused with him, he could forget who he was and become a version that had never lived. Directive training whispered through his mind. Remove the echo, reject the echo, replace the echo with truth. Arion stepped back slowly. The echo mirrored him, as if tied to him by an invisible thread of probability. Then it spoke. Not with words, but with impressions, flashes of a possible future. Him standing in a wasteland of collapsed timelines. Lysa crying out from behind a fracturing horizon. The drift swallowing the city in a tidal wave of white noise. Arion gritted his teeth. These were not visions. They were lures. Echoes tried to convince the mind they were real so it would accept them, and once accepted, they locked in place like parasites. Remove the echo, he whispered. But the echo stepped closer. Its outline sharpened, and suddenly Arion recognized the insignia on its flickering jacket, the same military emblem as the alternate Arion from the Matrix reconstruction. He shook his head. No, you're not truth. You're noise. You're contamination. The echo reached out a hand. Arion stumbled back and hit the wall. Light flickered. The hum deepened, vibrating the marrow of his bones. The corridor warped and stretched and folded around him. He felt memories slipping, a birthday, his mother's voice, the warmth of old sunlight. Panic clawed up his throat. Reject the echo, reject the echo. He squeezed his eyes shut and anchored himself with the mantra. When he opened them, he forced his mind to project the truth. His real childhood, his real timeline, his real path. He said aloud, "Replace the echo with truth." The echo shuddered. Its form rippled like liquid caught between temperatures. Arion held the truth in his mind, solid, sharp, unbreakable. The echo fractured. It dissolved into shards of light, then evaporated entirely, leaving only silence, thick and trembling. Arion sagged against the wall. His pulse pounded like a reactor. Future echo encounters were rare, but intensely dangerous. Most citizens never survived contamination. Those who did
frequently lost years of their lives, replaced by fragments of foreign futures. He dragged a hand across his face. Sector 9 waited. Lysa waited. But now he knew the drift's influence was spreading faster than any directive report admitted. As he moved down the corridor, he noticed symbols etched faintly into the walls, spiraling glyphs just like the ones from his Matrix visions. They pulsed with a subtle luminescence, like warnings written by the timeline itself. What is real? The question chased him with every step. He reached a lift hub, where two directive officers stood stiffly, their eyes hollow, as if staring at something far away. "Sector 9, he asked. Neither responded. Instead, one officer lifted her gaze, and Arion's blood chilled. Her pupils flickered, frames of multiple timelines shifting like rapid-fire images, a sign of deep echo contamination. She whispered the same phrase the alternate Arion had spoken. "You cannot escape the signal." Arion stepped back. The drift had already reached them. Echoes had burrowed deep, rewriting their perception of reality. The lift doors opened with a metallic sigh. Sector 9 descended into darkness. Arion inhaled. He whispered the mantra, steady, sharp, necessary. Remove the echo. Reject the echo. Replace the echo with truth. And then he stepped inside, knowing the next contamination might not be so easy to resist, and that whatever he found in Sector 9 would be worse, much worse.
Chapter 5. Chapter 5. Strengthen the chrono-self through repetition loops. The lift descended into Sector 9 with a slow, metallic groan, as if the structure itself feared what lay below. Arion's reflection shivered across the lift's reinforced glass, bending and splitting as temporal energy bled into the shaft. It reminded him of the echo he had destroyed, still lingering at the edges of his perception like a stain. He whispered the mantra to steady himself. Repeat to retain. Repeat to remain. Repeat to survive. The directive called it chrono-reinforcement, a training regimen designed to strengthen the chrono-self, the version of a person capable of existing consistently across multiple unstable timelines. Those who failed the regimen became blurred around the edges, gradually losing cohesion until they dissolved into probability dust. The chrono-self was more than identity. It was resilience layered into the neural fabric of consciousness. When the lift doors hissed open, Arion stepped into a cavernous training hall illuminated by pulsating rings of blue-white light. The air was warm, vibrating with rhythmic pulses like a heartbeat amplified through metal. He recognized the place from directive documents, the repetition vault. Here, citizens were drilled to survive timeline storms, events where multiple futures collided, threatening to overwrite the present. Rows of people stood within circular platforms, each surrounded by looping holograms. Their faces were strained with concentration. Some repeated gestures, some recited affirmations, some performed synchronized movements as the holograms replayed alternate versions of themselves, choices they might have made, words they almost said, lives they could have lived. Arion watched one woman confront a sequence of flickering selves, one grieving, one triumphant, one angry, one hollow. She pressed her palms together, breath trembling. "Repeat to retain," she whispered. The holograms flickered, but did not vanish. "Repeat to remain." Two versions dissolved into static. "Repeat to survive." The final apparition shattered like glass. Arion felt a chill. These drills weren't just repetition. They were combat against possible identities that tried to infiltrate the mind when timelines buckled. A directive instructor approached him, a tall, silver-haired man with chronometric interface scars along his temples. He looked at Arion, not with curiosity,
but with recognition, as if he had been expecting him. You've reconstructed your matrix, but the drift has reached Sector 9. Your chrono self needs reinforcement before you go any further. Arion bristled. There's no time, my sister. There is only time, and right now, it is trying to erase you. The hall pulsed. In the distance, the repeating drills grew louder, synchronized like a ritual. Arion realized he wasn't just here by chance. The directive had guided him, step by step, to this place, this moment. The instructor held out a palm. A sphere of shimmering probability unfolded above it, swirling with images of Arion across countless variations. Some versions stood strong, some faltered, some were strangers entirely. This is your chrono self, or rather your potential chrono selves. To survive what's coming, you must choose the version of you that endures across collapse. Arion swallowed. How? Through loops. The instructor gestured to an empty platform. Arion stepped onto it reluctantly. The rings of light rose around him, forming a cage of infinite reflections. Suddenly, the world fractured. Holograms flickered into existence. Arion arguing with Lysa. Arion fleeing a collapsing timeline. Arion wearing the military insignia that haunted him. Arion standing alone in a void of drifting memories. Each version spoke, but their words overlapped into incomprehensible noise. He felt himself splitting, fraying at the edges. Repeat to retain, Arion whispered. A few reflections wavered. Repeat to remain. The noise quieted. The reflections slowed, their boundaries stabilizing. Repeat to survive. Light surged outward. Most reflections shattered, leaving only a handful remaining, versions of himself aligned with his true identity. But one reflection didn't fade. The older Arion, the one from the Matrix, stood perfectly solid. He stepped forward. Timeline 7 collapses next. Arion's breath froze in his lungs. Who are you? I'm what you become if you fail, but also what you can become if you survive. The platform trembled violently, the hall flickering as if the timeline itself were faltering. Arion whispered again, louder, firmer. Repeat to retain. Repeat to remain. Repeat to survive. The reflection cracked. Light exploded. When the world reformed, the drill chamber fell silent. Arion stood taller. His thoughts were clearer. His presence felt anchored, not just in one timeline, but across many. He felt the strength of alignment, the density of a chrono self beginning to take shape. The instructor nodded. You're ready. But the floor shook, then split with a distant scream of metal. A shockwave rippled through the hall. The drift had breached the sector's core. Sector 9 was no longer collapsing. It was being rewritten, and Lysa was somewhere inside the rewrite.
Chapter 6.
Chapter 6. Override Memory Collapse Protocols. Sector 9 felt like a wound in the city, open, raw, and pulsing with unstable time. Arion moved through its fractured corridors with caution, each step echoing against walls that shimmered between past and present. The drift had rewritten entire sections of the district. Buildings were rearranged, street names mutated. Even gravity felt uncertain, sliding subtly beneath his feet like shifting sand. He whispered under his breath, "Override collapse, reclaim memory, restore continuity." This mantra belonged to the directive's deepest training, the mental armor forged for fighting against the human mind's most catastrophic failsafe, memory collapse. When confronted with contradictory timelines, the brain attempted to protect itself by erasing confused segments, sealing them off like corrupted data.
But in a collapsing time stream, memory collapse was deadly. Too many erasures, and the self dissolved entirely. Arion felt the first tremor of collapse before he saw anything unusual. It began behind his eyes, an uncomfortable tightening, then a flicker of disorientation. His childhood home flashed before him, then vanished, then returned, but the roof was red instead of white, then vanished again. He stopped walking. A cold sweat formed at the base of his spine. This is collapse. This is the mind trying to shut down contradictions. He inhaled sharply and stepped into an abandoned plaza. The ground was cracked, littered with shattered holographic tiles that flickered with confused memories. People's faces appeared and blinked out. Street scenes from different decades overlapped like transparent layers of glass. A group of collapsed citizens wandered the area, their eyes vacant, repeating fragments of half-erased memories. One man knelt on the ground, whispering the same sentence over and over. I used to have a... But he could no longer remember what. Arion forced himself not to listen. Memory collapse was contagious, not biologically, but psychologically. Hearing someone else lose their sense of self made the mind more vulnerable to losing its own. He pressed his palms together, grounding himself. Override collapse, he murmured. The world flickered again. Suddenly, he saw two versions of the plaza at once, one filled with bustling crowds from 10 years ago, the other empty and decayed. They overlapped like competing realities fighting for dominance. Arion's vision blurred. A warm pressure built in his skull. His identity began slipping. Names, dates, sensations drifting toward the edge of erasure. A voice cut through the confusion. Arion! He spun around. A young girl stood near the collapsed fountain, her shape flickering like a disrupted hologram. She looked like Lysa, but younger. Not the age she should be. Not the age she had been. She smiled at him with the heartbreakingly familiar grin from his childhood. Come on. You're late again. His chest tightened. This isn't real. This is collapse manipulation. Memory collapse often manifested as emotional decoys, constructed images designed to lure the mind into passive acceptance of erasure. Arion stepped back. You're not her. The girl tilted her head. But you remember me. You know this moment. The plaza twisted. Gravity lurched. The girl reached for him. His thoughts fragmented for a second. Just 1 second, and that was enough for collapse to slip deeper into his mind. A memory of losing Lisa during the first timeline quake surfaced. Another of her standing beside him last week. Another of her never existing at all. His knees buckled. Reclaim memory, he gasped. The girl's face distorted. Her smile flickered into a glitch of static. Stay with me, she whispered, voice no longer human. Reclaim memory, Arion shouted, forcing the truth back into his consciousness. He pressed his palm against his anchor, the one embedded during the directive's first sequence. The anchor pulsed warmly, realigning his thoughts. The false memories flickered. The emotional decoy shattered like fractured glass. Light swept across the plaza as his real memories surged into place. Lisa at age 12. Lisa at age 17. Lisa yesterday, laughing beneath the rust-colored sky. Lisa now, lost somewhere within this fractured sector. Arion exhaled as the world stabilized around him. Memory collapse loosened its grip. Restore continuity, he whispered, sealing the protocol. The plaza calmed. The overlapping timelines faded, leaving only the present, broken, distorted, but coherent.
From the far end of the plaza, a shadow moved. Not a human one. A tall figure stepped into view, faceless yet weighted with intention. Its limbs lagged behind its body. Its presence warped the air. Not a future echo. Not a collapsed citizen. Something older. Something deeper. Something tied to the drift itself. Arion's breath hitched. Whatever it was, it had been waiting for him.
Chapter 7.
Chapter 7. Synchronize consciousness with the prime timeline. The figure at the far end of the plaza did not move, but the world around it bent, folding toward its presence like fabric drawn into a vortex. Arion felt the same gravitational distortion he had sensed in the anchor chamber, but stronger, older, threaded with intention rather than malfunction. He took one careful step back. The figure mirrored him perfectly. Then another. Again it mirrored him. Its motions were delayed by a fraction of a second, as though processed through a distant reality. Not a future echo. Not a collapsed citizen. A prime reflection. His pulse hammered. Prime reflections appeared only when the prime timeline, the last stable spine of reality, was trying to reassert itself. Their presence meant one thing. The timelines were competing for precedence, and one of them wanted Arion. The figure raised a hand and traced a slow arc in the air. The line shimmered with luminous particles. Then, with a sound like glass resonating, the air parted, revealing a swirling corridor of golden blue threads. Arion inhaled sharply. He recognized it from directive simulations. A prime synchronization path. Only those who synchronized with the prime timeline could walk it. Anyone else would be scattered into temporal dust. The reflection tilted its head, inviting him. Arion swallowed. His mind trembled at the edge of coherence after the memory collapse encounter. He needed to stabilize, to align, to sync. Directive training whispered like a compass needle clicking toward true north. Sync with stability. Sync with clarity. Sync with continuity. He repeated it aloud. Once, twice, a third time. The plaza shifted, the fractures in reality softened, the ambient vibrations dimming as if waiting for him to attune. He felt his chrono-self tightening, aligning, becoming singular. The prime reflection watched, motionless. Arion stepped into the corridor. Light enveloped him instantly. He drifted weightless through strands of time, millions of glowing threads stretching into infinity, each a version of reality branching, looping, collapsing, or thriving. Some were dark, some were brilliant, some flickered as though dying. He reached toward a nearby thread and felt an electric shock of recognition, a world where Lissa had never been born. Another thread showed a city untouched by drift. Another a wasteland of fractured echoes. Arion steadied his breath. The directive always warned, do not follow curious timelines. Follow the stable one. Then came the signal. A low hum, deep and ancient, vibrated through the corridor, the same hum he had sensed at the anchor chamber, the matrix chamber, and during future echo contamination. He remembered the haunting phrase repeated by echoes and corrupted citizens. You cannot escape the signal. But here, within the prime corridor, he understood something he hadn't before. It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder. The signal was the prime timeline, reaching out, calling those who could still be saved. Arion closed his eyes and let the hum guide him. Threads brightened in response, lighting a path through the corridor. His consciousness leaned toward one specific timeline thread, a thicker, more vibrant one, pulsing with coherence. The prime reflection appeared beside him, pointing toward the thread with an expression that felt like urgency. Is that it? Arion asked, voice trembling.
The reflection nodded slowly. He extended his hand toward the pulsing thread. It warmed his skin, then wrapped around his wrist like a living ribbon. The corridor darkened around him. The signal intensified. Arion whispered, "Sync with stability. Sync with clarity. Sync with continuity." The thread tightened. Reality snapped. He fell onto solid ground, Sector 9, but repaired, whole, humming with structured energy. No fractures, no echoes, no collapsing probability layers. The air tasted cleaner, the light more coherent. This was the prime version of the district, what it should be, what it once was. Arion's lungs shook with relief. Then he heard footsteps behind him. He turned. A group of directive scouts rushed toward him, confused, breathless. "You just appeared out of nowhere. We thought the drift took you." Arion glanced around. No sign of the prime corridor. No sign of the prime reflection. The warning hum faded into memory. But something else caught his attention. A beacon flashing red across the city map displayed on the wall. Sector 12, total destabilization, possible timeline breach, high causal exposure. And beneath the warning, a list of missing persons. Lysa's name glowed at the top. Arion's throat tightened. Even the prime timeline could not shield her anymore. He whispered the mantra once more, like a vow. Sync with stability. Sync with clarity. Sync with continuity. Then he ran towards Sector 12, knowing that whatever awaited him next would not just distort reality, it would challenge the core of who he had become.
Chapter 8.
Chapter 8. Reject Alternate World Imposters. Sector 12 felt nothing like the prime-aligned version of Sector 9. Here, the air itself trembled with contradiction. Buildings flickered between architectural styles from different centuries. Shadows refused to match the direction of the light. Every few seconds, Arion heard the faint sound of whispers, voices repeating words that didn't belong to the present timeline. As he crossed the fractured boulevard, the ground beneath him rippled like disturbed water. He steadied himself, pulse sharp with urgency. Lysa was somewhere in this chaos. Sector 12 had become a convergence point where multiple realities overlapped so tightly that identity itself was in constant jeopardy. Ahead, a directive barricade crackled with unstable energy. The guards stationed there looked strangely identical. Too identical. Their uniforms were mismatched, their badges glitching, their expressions blank. One guard stepped forward. "Citizen," he said, voice slightly delayed, "present your timeline verification." Arion recognized the distortion in the man's voice. He had heard it once before, in the presence of the alternate Arion during the repetition loops. Identity imposters. Versions of people who slipped through collapsed timelines, desperate to anchor themselves in a reality not their own. Arion's spine tightened. He whispered the mantra like a shield. Reject the imposter, defend the self, protect the origin code. The guard's expression flickered, concern, confusion, anger, cycling through emotions as though sampling them. "Your verification," he repeated. Arion stepped back just as another guard approached, bearing the exact same face. And then a third stepped out from behind the barricade, identical down to the scar above the eyebrow. 3 versions. 1 timeline's guard. 2 imposters. Or worse, none of them real. The world shimmered. The middle guard blinked out of existence for half a second, then returned, but in a different stance. The telltale sign of an unstable import from another timeline. Arion lifted his hand slowly. I am not your target. I do not anchor your reality. All three guards responded, speaking in unison. You are the anomaly. You are the divergence point. You must be replaced. Arion's pulse punched against his ribcage. Imposters didn't always attack physically. More often, they infected the cognitive field, trying to force the mind to accept them as the dominant identity. The guards stepped closer. Their bodies glitched, warping into slightly altered versions of Arion himself. One taller, one younger, one wearing that same haunting military insignia. Alternate Arions. His breath hitched. He recognized the tactic, identity mirroring, used during collapse storms to destabilize victims. They were trying to convince him that they were the correct version of him. The youngest one smiled, voice dripping with false familiarity. We survived longer than you. We made better choices. We deserve this life. The one with the insignia stepped forward. You're weak. You cling to a timeline that's already dying. Let us correct your mistake. He felt their words reverberating inside his skull, pressing against his origin code. For a moment, just a moment, doubt whispered, what if they were right? What if he was the anomaly? But then Lysa's voice echoed in his memory, the real one, the one from the prime-aligned matrix. Arion, don't let the world decide who you become. He straightened. His voice cut through the distorted air, sharp and steady. Reject the imposter. Defend the self. Protect the origin code. The timeline trembled. The imposters wavered. Their forms flickered violently, reality struggling to maintain their existence. The insignia version lunged at him. Arion braced, but instead of striking, the imposter's body dissolved into a torrent of fractured timelines, screaming fragments of futures that never happened. The younger version followed, breaking apart like sand caught in a solar storm. The last guard stared at Arion, eyes widening with something like fear. Then he too, shattered, erased from a reality that had finally rejected them. Silence washed over the boulevard. Arion exhaled shakily, but the victory was brief. A deeper rumble shook the ground. Sector 12 wasn't just unstable, it was unraveling. And then he saw it. A holographic distress trail woven into the air like a ribbon of desperate light, replaying over and over. Lysa's face, her voice whispering, Arion, if you see this, the timeline isn't what you think. The message glitched, rewound, and repeated. Arion stepped toward it, heart pounding. The hologram flickered again, this time showing two Lysas. One crying, one calm. One of them real, one of them an imposter. The timeline storm deepened, roaring like a cosmic tide. Arion whispered the mantra again, but this time it trembled with fear. Reject the imposter, defend the self, protect the origin code. Because now the imposter wasn't another version of him. It might be another version of her.
Chapter 9.
Chapter 9. Fortify the Self Against Continuum Noise. The twin holograms of Lysa pulsed in the unstable air, their forms glitching in and out of coherence as Sector 12 buckled beneath them. Arion took one step forward, and instantly the world around him vibrated with a piercing static that drilled into the base of his skull. Continuum noise. He staggered. The noise wasn't sound. It wasn't even a frequency. It was raw temporal interference, the psychic static produced when timelines collided and scraped against each other. It hit the mind first, eroding focus, unraveling conviction, draining the sense of self like sand slipping through fingertips. He clutched the side of a ruptured pillar as the noise deepened, resonating with the same mantra the imposters had used. "You cannot escape the signal. You cannot escape the signal." But this time, it wasn't an echo or an imposter whispering the phrase. It was the continuum itself. Arion's thoughts split apart. One layer remembered training. Another insisted he had never taken training at all. Another whispered that Lysa had already died. Another insisted she had never been born. His memories flickered like broken projections. He forced himself to breathe, slow, deliberate. Continuum noise strips away identity. Noise corrodes the self. Noise devours the unprepared. The directive had a name for the phenomenon: cognitive dissolution, a state where the self degraded into scattered packets of possibility. Arion slammed his fist against the pillar, grounding himself in sensation. He whispered the mantra, even as his vision fractured into kaleidoscopic shards. Fortify, strengthen, endure. The words felt thin at first, swept away by the noise, but he repeated them again, louder, harder, sharper. The sound vibrated through his chest, steadying the rhythm of his breath. Fortify, strengthen, endure. Slowly, the world steadied. Not fully. Sector 12 was too damaged for that, but enough for him to stand without the ground dissolving beneath him. He looked back to the Lysis. One cried, reaching out with trembling hands. The other stood still, calm, too calm, her eyes flicking with the faint timeline distortions he now recognized instinctively. Noise made the difference sharper. Because noise attacked imposters too. Anything that lacked a coherent origin code faltered in its presence. The calm Lysa flickered, then again, then harder. Arion knew. She wasn't his Lysa. But he couldn't confront her yet, not without stabilizing more. He needed deeper reinforcement, what the directive called Fortification Layer 3, the mental armor used by elite Chrono-Guard operatives who operated in collapsing warfront timelines. The vault drills introduced the basics, but now, in the heart of continuum rupture, he needed mastery. He closed his eyes and summoned the visualization taught in directive intelligence logs. The self as a citadel of memory. Identity as a fortress of reinforced continuity. The mind as a gravitational anchor stabilizing against shifting cosmic tides. He imagined walls forming around his consciousness, walls etched with the spiraling glyph that had followed him across chapters of reality, a symbol he no longer feared, because now he realized it was a shield, not a threat, a structure left behind by those who had survived timeline collapse. The noise crashed against the walls of his citadel. It surged like a storm. It tried to seep through cracks, whispering impossible futures, impossible truths. Arion held the mantra like a blade. Fortify, strengthen, endure. The noise wavered. He pushed harder, visualizing the citadel expanding, solidifying, glowing with a clarity the noise couldn't penetrate. Fortify, strengthen, endure. The static shattered. Silence, dense, heavy, waiting, fell across Sector 12. Arion opened his eyes. The world was sharper now, not because the noise was gone, but but because he had risen above its corrosive threshold. His chrono-self was stronger than it had ever been. His mind felt layered, reinforced with new density, resistant to erosion. The sobbing Lysa flickered weakly, but held her form. The calm Lysa smiled. Too perfect, too still, and stepped forward. "You don't have much time. The breach is widening." Her voice echoed wrong in the space. A half-second delay, a tonal hum that didn't belong. Arion hardened his gaze. The citadel in his mind thrummed with certainty. "You're not her," he said quietly. The calm Lysa froze. Her face fractured, literally, splintering into a mosaic of alternate expressions: fear, fury, indifference, pleading. A sign of imposter destabilization under fortified consciousness. Arion stepped toward her, each footfall echoing with intention. "I won't be overwritten, not by you, not by anything." The noise surged back suddenly, as if enraged by his resistance. But this time, Arion did not falter. He planted his mental foundation like bedrock. Fortify, strengthen, endure. The imposter screamed, a glitching, impossible sound, and dissolved into a burst of collapsing timelines. Only the crying Lysa remained. Arion raced toward her, but at the center of the plaza, the ground split open, revealing a swirling abyss of raw temporal distortion, and Lysa slipped through. Arion dove after her, into a darkness where no timeline remained stable, and where the continuum noise was only the beginning.
Chapter 10.
Chapter 10. Complete the directive and become temporal resistant. Arion plunged into the temporal abyss after Lysa, the rupture swallowing him in a maelstrom of collapsing timelines. There was no up or down, no past or future, only the endless churn of fractured memory and possibility. Color and shadow twisted in spirals. Gravity shifted like breath. Time pulsed with a heartbeat that was not his own. The continuum noise screamed as he fell, shredding thought and sensation into fragmented echoes. But Arion refused to yield. His voice cut through the chaos, ragged and defiant. "Fortify, strengthen, endure." The words steadied him. They always had. But now, something new moved through the distortion. A deeper hum, a gravitational pull that felt impossibly familiar. A signal, not the noise, not the drift, the directive. The abyss softened, coalescing into a vast chamber of shimmering black glass. Arion stood upon a platform suspended above infinity, each step echoing across impossible vastness. Before him floated a colossal structure, rotating in slow cosmic arcs, an ancient crystalline engine carved with the spiraling glyph he had seen again and again. This was no symbol of collapse. This was the reconstruction core. Lysa stood at its base, eyes wide with awe and fear. She looked real, solid, anchored. "Arion," she whispered, voice trembling. "It called me here." He ran to her, gripping her shoulders. "Are you intact? Did the drift touch you?" She shook her head. "No, not drift. Something else. Something trying to hold the timelines together." A realization struck him. Prime timeline integrity requires anchors. Temporal resistance requires choice. Reconstruction requires identity. The core pulsed, synchronizing with his heartbeat. A directive voice, older than the city, older than civilization, filled the chamber. Final sequence. Reconstruction pulse. Integrate all anchors. Stabilize all selves. Become resistant across time.
Arion felt the truth bloom inside him like supernova light. This was the final stage of the directive, the culmination of everything he had endured. Anchoring the mind, stabilizing identity, rebuilding the matrix, eliminating echoes, strengthening the chrono self, overriding collapse, syncing with the prime timeline, rejecting imposters, fortifying against continuum noise. Every trial had been preparation for this one moment. The core brightened, projecting thousands of versions of Arion across the chamber, young and old, brave and broken, strong and shattered. Every timeline he could have lived stood before him, forming a constellation of selves. Lysa gasped, "Arion, they're all you." The directive voice echoed again. "To endure the future, the self must transcend the timeline." One by one, the alternate Arions stepped forward, merging into him as radiant streams of memory and strength. He felt the shock of each integration, a lifetime of experience folding seamlessly into his chrono self. A warrior's courage, a scholar's wisdom, a child's innocence, a survivor's resilience, a leader's clarity. Each fusion strengthened his origin code, multiplying his identity density until he existed in more than one temporal layer at once. The core vibrated violently. Time warped. Reconstruction pulse initiating. The floor split open beneath them, Lysa clinging to him, terrified. But Arion no longer felt fear. His consciousness expanded outward, threading into every direction of time like luminous roots anchoring themselves in the soil of existence. He rose into the air as the pulse surged through him, transforming thought into structure, memory into armor, identity into something unshakable. He whispered the final mantra quietly at first, then louder as the pulse intensified. "You are reconstructed." The chamber ignited. "You are anchored." Timelines aligned. "You endure beyond time." The reality bowed. The drift recoiled. Continuum noise shattered. The abyss closed. When the light finally dimmed, Arion stood upon a stable horizon, Lysa beside him, the chamber restored to stillness. The reconstruction core faded into the air like dissolving stardust. The directive voice spoke one last time. "Temporal resistant consciousness achieved. The future can no longer rewrite you." Lysa took his hand. "Arion, what are you now?" He looked into her eyes, steady, focused, unfractured, and felt the timelines resonate around him, no longer threats, but pathways he could navigate at will. "I am what I chose to become. A self the future cannot change." The chamber doors opened, revealing a world still trembling at the edge of collapse, but now Arion felt no fear of what lay ahead. Because he knew. He was reconstructed. He was anchored. He endured beyond time. And the fight for reality had only just begun.
The time stream may fracture. The future may rewrite itself. Memory may collapse, and identities may blur, but a reconstructed mind endures. You have executed the mind anchor sequence. You have stabilized identity against drift. You have rebuilt the neural timeline matrix, eliminated future echo contamination, overridden collapse, synchronized with the prime timeline, rejected imposters, and fortified your consciousness against the noise of a failing continuum. You have completed the directive.
You stand as a temporal resistant being, anchored, reinforced, unerasable. Remember this: timelines may fall, but a reconstructed mind does not. The directive lives through you. Now take this reconstructed identity into your life and prove that time itself cannot alter who you choose to become. This is your challenge. Hold your timeline. Defend your existence. Refuse erasure.